Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. See a handful of people that have come in. Um, Thank you all for being here. My name is Tanner. I'm the Colorado Program Director with Solar United Neighbors. Today, we're going to be talking about distributed power plants, otherwise known as virtual power plants, and the program that has been proposed by Xcel, the PUC. Gonna get some slides going here in just a second, give some sort of proper introductions, then we'll get going with the content. For today, as you have questions that come up, feel free to put them in the chat. We will answer them in the chat as we go through the presentation. And then if there's time at the end of our webinar today, we'll sort of answer some live. So that all sounds good. We can go ahead and get started. We can go on to the next slide here. All right, everybody. So if you haven't come our way before, we are Solar United Neighbors, and we are a national vendor neutral nonprofit that really steps in and supports the needs and interests of solar owners, solar supporters, whether that's you've gone solar with a rooftop array, community solar subscriber, or you're just interested in the subject of solar. You're welcome in our community, and we're thankful that you're here. You can see some stats. We've helped over 10,000 folks go solar since our organization began. And on the next slide here, we have some Colorado specific stats. Since the program started in 2019, we've helped over 1,000 homeowners go solar in Colorado. We've deployed around 8 megawatts of rooftop capacity. I get really excited looking at these numbers just to see sort of the real impact that we've had in folks' lives since 2019. Moving on a little bit here. Our theory of change is threefold. So as I mentioned, we really love to help folks go solar, whether that is through one of our group purchase campaigns, which I'm sure many of you have been a part of, or if it's sort of a one-to-one consultation. We like to be able to provide just support on your solar journey, because we acknowledge and recognize that it can be confusing and complicated, and sometimes it's helpful to have sort of a neutral third party there to walk you through the process. As you're going solar, before, during, after, we love to host events as well. We were just up in Broomfield last night, met with around 50 or so folks up in Broomfield, talked about the process of going solar, some other policy related issues that are happening in our world. And then we love to do just like fun events too. So come hang out with us at a brewery, coffee shop, just chat and have informal discussions about energy issues that are impacting you and your family, and how we can sort of move the needle on those. Which really takes us to the third part of our theory of change, which is fighting for energy rights. This happens at the local level, whether you're dealing with issues at your HOA or city or county, up to the state and federal levels. We really try and engage in all of those spaces in as robust of a way as possible. And finally here, an important note is that we really do, our aim is to build a new energy system that really works for everybody. And that is sort of our emphasis in working for equity. We acknowledge that there have been communities that have historically been excluded from the energy transition. And we want to see a system that works for everyone and doesn't leave anyone behind. On today's call, we have a couple of guest speakers. We have Yara Marin, who's joining from Vote Solar. She is their Interior West Deputy Program Director, and she's going to be talking a little bit about the Public Utilities Commission, how it operates, and the importance of sort of broad community support. And then we also have Kevin Lucas from the Solar Energy Industries Association. He's their Vice President of Policy Analysis. He's going to be digging a little bit more into the details of what Xcel has proposed at the PUC, sort of where we're sitting with distributed power plants, and how things are shaping up in Colorado. And then finally, who I'm going to pass it to next is going to be Shannon Anderson from Sun's team. Shannon is our virtual power plant policy director. She's going to be sort of sharing high level about what distributed power plants or virtual power plants are, how they function, and what the benefits are to the community. So with that, we can move forward a few slides here. I jumped ahead a little bit, my fault, folks. And I'm going to pass it over to Shannon. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Tanner. It's great to have everyone here today. Excited to have this conversation with you about Colorado's opportunity for distributed or virtual power plants. Go ahead and do the next slide. So distributed power plants are also known as virtual power plants. And essentially they are just that, a distributed power plant. So what you do is you have geographically dispersed groups of customer resources that are centrally managed and networked together to provide resources just like a traditional power plant. Go ahead and next slide. So these resources are used in a coordinated manner during what's called a grid event. And this is a time when a utility has a particular need for power. So think of, evening on a hot summer day when everyone's running their ACs and they come home from work. So there's a need to have additional resources added to the grid, and distributed power plants work perfectly in those moments by adding extra power just when a utility needs it most. Go ahead and next slide. So think of your home as a resource for the grid. And particularly if you already have solar, maybe you want to add battery storage, you are exactly the kind of person that can participate in a distributed power plant program. So again, these programs kind of network together, home and business battery storage and solar resources, and then deploy those resources to the grid exactly when the grid needs them the most. Go ahead and next slide. So thinking a little bit more about distributed energy resources that can be deployed in these programs. At Sun, of course, we're particularly interested in solar power and battery storage that's powered through solar, but smart thermostats, smart appliances, your HVAC system, your heat pumps, if you're an EV owner, these are all resources that can be bundled and managed together through a distributed power plant program. Go ahead and next slide. So again, how distributed power plants really work is exactly sort of this kind of time frame. So if you're a solar owner, obviously your solar isn't generating energy overnight, but kind of when it kicks in on the morning. And if you have battery storage, you can start using that solar from your roof to start charging up your battery. And then, throughout the day, you're kind of using your battery and your solar in the typical way you would to reduce your own home consumption. And then say, around 6 or 7 p.m., that's when the utility is going to call on these resources to be available for them. And that's what this event period is for a grid event. And again, that's when you collectively have all of these battery resources from across the utility territory bundled together, deployed together, and that creates a lot of resources for the utility. Go ahead and next slide. The other advantage of distributed power plants is they can rapidly scale. So I like this chart from Oman Analytics showing resources in California. If you look at the program there, it's doubled over the last year. Just, within 1 year, going from 557 megawatts to almost a gigawatt of power resources that are available for the grid. So we're hoping to see a similar scale, to deploy in Colorado. We'll get into this a little bit in a moment, but Excel's program is starting off a little bit more modest than this, but we see a lot of potential for Colorado and the way that we can rapidly scale these resources to make them available for the grid. Go to the next slide. So the case for distributed power plants in Colorado, again, Sun is really excited to be working with you all on this program. Colorado has tremendous potential for distributed power plants. There's been a lot of growth in residential storage. So those of you that are adopting battery storage, adding battery storage maybe after you installed solar, or getting battery storage when you get solar, you're exactly the kind of homeowner that we would love to have get involved in this program. That said, Colorado is ninth in the country in installed battery storage capacity. So there's room to grow as well. And we're hoping with the right incentive programs being launched through this particular distributed power plant that Xcel's getting up and running, that will actually drive some battery storage adoption within Colorado and create even more resources to be available for home needs as well as the grid and the utility as a whole. Go to the next slide. So distributed power plants have a lot of opportunity, again, not just for yourself as a homeowner, but for all of us as utility ratepayers. Distributed power plants are much more affordable than other kinds of resources that can be installed by a utility. And that's simply because the distributed power plants use resources that you as customers already have created. You've installed solar, you've installed battery storage. So those resources then become resources for the grid through a distributed power plant. And it makes it so the utility doesn't have to go out and install resources on its own. And this just creates tremendous cost savings overall. Distributed power plants are upwards of 60% more affordable than any other kind of resource a utility can bring to the grid. Go to next slide. Distributed power plants also have a lot of workforce potential, which we're excited about at Sun. They create a lot of diverse job types within the solar industry, thinking of, even tech jobs. So there's software to run these programs. There's different, installation jobs, EV charging, EV manufacturing. So a lot of different kind of jobs types. And because the resources are through a distributed power plant, that makes the jobs distributed as well. And so they're able to be located in communities across the state, as opposed to centrally located at a central power plant. And these programs also create additional needs for training and apprenticeship programs, which just grows the solar job force into the future. Go ahead and next slide. So we'll be getting into the details of Xcel's proposed aggregated virtual power plant program here in a minute. I did just want to highlight, though, that there's other distributed power plant programs in Colorado already. For instance, Holy Cross Energy has a distributed power plant program. We're going to be looking to, getting other DPPs up and running in Colorado. So if you're not in Xcel territory, don't worry. There's still opportunity for you. But because Xcel is kind of the hot thing going on right now, we're going to spend a little bit of time focusing on that. So go to next slide. So where we are with Xcel's proposed AVP program kind of starts with the story of legislation in 2014. Colorado was really leading the nation with SB 24218 in the 2024 session. It requires distribution system planning and a virtual power plant tariff filing. This legislation that Colorado passed is now being used as a model for other states around the country. And we're excited to kind of see, again, Colorado's leadership here in this work. Thanks to that legislation, Xcel had to file its program with the Public Utilities Commission earlier this year. It's proposing 125 megawatts of resources over a 5-year period with a very affordable program budget. And again, that's just what these programs are. They're lots of megawatts for not a lot of dollars. And the commission has scheduled a hearing starting next week, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And with that, I'll turn things over to Kevin from SIA.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, Kevin Lucas from CA here. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys about an interesting program happening in Colorado. A little background on myself. I work for the National Solar Energy Industries Association, so we're a national trade association focused on solar and storage in the US. One of our particular areas that we've been focused on the last several years is in Colorado. I do expert witness testimony in regulatory dockets across the country on things such as rate design, net metering, integrated resource planning, and increasingly have been putting in testimony on virtual power plant program design. I've enjoyed working in Colorado and echo everything that Shannon said about the busyness and the number of simultaneous number of efforts that are going on in Colorado, both from a policy perspective at the General Assembly and then filtering into the regulatory sphere in front of the Utilities Commission. Has been rather phenomenal. And basically, Colorado is doing everything all at the same time. They have, robust carbon reduction plans. They have, specific goals to decarbonize their electricity space. They have a clean heat program that is seeking to transform building heating loads to move away from fossil fuels and moving towards electrification. They have an electric transportation program that they're working on. And as we mentioned here, they have been doing integrated resource planning for a while, but they are now starting up on the distribution system planning. And just for those who don't know, a high level differential there is the integrated resource planning is where you're planning the bulk power grid, where you're looking in aggregate at how much power all the customers in the system use, the timing of that use, and then building up a portfolio of resources that not only meets the obligations, but helps with the specific carbon reduction goals that the state has. So this is where you will see some news articles coming about large scale systems being built, gigawatts of new power generation. Intimately involved in this is the transmission system and the transmission planning process, which Colorado is also doing, to build the wires that are needed to transmit those large power systems from where they are to the source of load, which is primarily in the Denver metro area. The distribution system planning is obviously focused on a different part of the grid. So these are not the bulk power grid. These aren't the big wires you see going down the highway. These are the systems that are in your city, in your neighborhood, and the resources that are connected to those smaller wires that are closer to load. And on the one hand, you have a few potentially additional challenges. It's a little bit more complicated to manage power flows and thousands of systems as opposed to manage a few larger central systems, but you have a bunch of advantages as well. One thing that we talked about already, they're distributed. They're located close to load. They help you avoid line losses of transmitting that power. They bring benefits to individual customers in a way that is sort of much more concrete than the large systems that are operating on the bulk power grid. So I was very excited to see the legislation that was passed and start to see Colorado planning its distribution system a little bit more intentionally and putting in place this virtual power plant program. So, SIA had intervened in this case alongside the Colorado Storage and Solar Association, or COSA, which is the local affiliate. Needless to say, when the filing was made, I was really quite disappointed. We had conversations with Public Service maybe a year and a half ago about some program design recommendations and had laid forward sort of our idea of what a good program looks like. And at the time, they seemed to largely agree with that. Unfortunately, what came out in the initial filing from the utility was something very different. It was a much heavier-handed approach, basic finance aggregate. It would have required aggregate megawatts and then pay if they drop and all the way to liquid damages and getting kicked out of the program if they had performance that was no. Just a litany of other issues that unfortunately we had to litigate pretty hard in the docket and just say, hey, this is not best practices. This is not where this should be. again, the good news is that through the work in the docket and the work in the settlement, we did reach a settlement that was largely, it was almost all the parties. It was not opposed by any party, and it was supported by almost all the parties in this case. And I'll talk through a few of the details of the specific program here in a minute. But importantly, it kind of cleared out one of the issue, and they're dealing with other much more complicated in the distributed system planning piece. We were glad that we were able to get to a settlement, and I think we got to a settlement that will be successful, offers the flexibility for customers. Didn't get everything that we wanted for sure, but it got a lot of the program design elements that we recommend. So at a high level, Shannon kind of laid out the value proposition for aggregated virtual power plants, as they call them here in Colorado. I would just like to echo one or emphasize one additional thing. The purpose of these programs is to sort of maximize the use of these resources, not just for the individual customer who owns a system, but for the grid as a whole. So what we find is fairly common is places such as Colorado that have good rate design and have a time of use rate. There is an inherent incentive for a customer with a solar and storage system or with a other virtual to reduce the amount of power they produce during peak hours, because the peak hours are when the costs are incurred. It's when the system losses are highest, when the grid is under the most stress. And so getting that reduction in the late afternoon and early evening hours has a disproportionate benefit for the grid as a whole. And the time of use rates that Colorado recently implemented reflect that. I think they're probably 2.5 or 3 times higher between 5 and 9 p.m. than they are during the other hours of the day. So there's a very clear signal for customers to install solar and storage, to charge their storage with their solar in the middle of the day, and then to discharge their storage in the evening to reduce their own usage. But one thing you'll find as you start to kind of analyze what a rational customer will do, if they have some capacity in their battery at the end of the peak period, they're going to sort of hold on to that, and they're going to use it to offset their power later in the evening, so that they can continue to reduce their own individual bill. But what is really useful for the system and what the virtual power plant is intended to do is it sends a separate price signal to recognize that there is additional value of fully discharging your battery during these peak times that may not be fully reflected even in a time of use rate. And so when the utility calls an event, it's telling all the different virtual power plant participants and all the different DERs on the system, hey, we need you to fully discharge your resource during this event call because there's additional value there. And in exchange for that additional value, we will compensate you and your aggregator for providing that resource. So it really is a way of aligning the incentives in a more fulsome manner between the individual, the aggregator, the grid as a whole, the utility, and even non-participants who ultimately will benefit by having lower loads, lower load growth, reduced losses, and so on and so forth. So, very encouraged about the activity that's happened in different states around virtual power plant programs, and happy that we got to a pretty good settlement position here in Colorado. So a couple highlights of the program details itself. These are going to be run through a third-party aggregator. So commonly the case, there's sort of 2 different ways that these virtual power plants can be set up. One is that the utility controls and dispatches the resources, and another is that they basically send signals out to aggregators who then in turn manage the endpoints, the endpoint systems. And what we have supported is the aggregator model. These are the vendors who likely have sold you your system. They may be the OEMs, the owners or the manufacturers of those individual systems. They already have the computer hooks into the system, have the protocols in place to control them, and have the necessary equipment and software to do the verification on the back end. So having a customer-owned and third-party aggregator resource, we think is the best practice here, and that's what Colorado is proposing. Interestingly, Excel was initially proposing to be one of those aggregators. The statute that was referenced prior to this did have a clause in there that basically said if public service could demonstrate then allowed to as an aggregator. Our position strongly because there's such an advantage from utility record going to be able to on that. Push back pretty strongly on Excel not participating as an aggregator, and where we landed in the settlement is that they will stay out for 2 years, and then there will be a fully contested hearing that will discuss whether it is appropriate or not for Excel to be one of these aggregators and compete against the third-party aggregators that are out there. There are a couple different things on the notice. Again, best practices to try to provide as much notice as possible, typically 24 hours in advance. A lot of the scheduling of the electricity system is done a day ahead, so this sort of follows in that. Public Service wanted to have as little as 10 minutes a notice initially, and ultimately we settled on it when possible, 24 hours, but the ability to call on a close time frame. Although with some of those closer time frames, if the systems don't perform quite as well, they will not be penalized in the same way. The 20% storage here, again, retained at the end of the event. And we had put some language in there that says advanced sort of known major weather events. If you have a big, huge storm coming through, a huge winter storm, something where there's a likelihood of widespread distribution system outages, that they would not call an event in that, so that the customers would have full use of their batteries during those events for their own reliability. Next slide. In terms of the events themselves, we landed on 80 events a year with up to 60 of those in the summer. In Public Services territory right now, the bulk of the peak loads and challenge to the grid is still in the summer. This is slowly evolving, and I think over the next 5 or 10 years, there's going to be more winter peaking risk and more winter resource adequacy issues. So it's possible that as the system or as this program evolves, the number of events called and the breakdown between summer and winter may change. But for now, it still is largely a summer peaking utility where the resources will be best used in that area. The events can be up to 4 hours in duration, but we also got a commitment from the company to make them as short as is necessary. So one thing with batteries is they have a finite amount of energy storage. You can discharge them at different rates. If you discharge them over a 4-hour period, you obviously are only getting half the reduction as if you discharged it over a 2-hour period. So our argument here is, well, if you only have a 2-hour need, then only call an event for 2 hours. That'll maximize the amount of megawatts that these resources can put onto the grid and maximize the benefits associated with them. There's a couple enrollment periods where the aggregators will be able to sign up new customers on a quarterly basis. And then a separate one for the summer-only resources, which are more the smart thermostat type programs. Compensation provided out through the aggregators on a quarterly basis. So the specific compensation is going to be a matter between the aggregator and the customer. So different aggregators will be able to offer programs to customers, and they will choose how much of the money to pass through. We'll see those in just a second. And then there is going to be a separate program as part of this docket that is going to be looking at front of the meter resources. So this is sort of a distributed distributed generation, I think was the name we used in the docket. And these are going to be larger, multi-megawatt systems that are still distribution connected. They're not really customer sided, but they're on the distribution grid. And so they bring many of the benefits of a virtual power plant, but are situated a little bit differently and therefore are still being contemplated in the main docket. Next slide. All right, and here we are with sort of the key numbers. One thing that I may have neglected to mention, but is very important, is this is a pay-for-performance program. So the way this is structured differently from some other programs, this is not an upfront incentive. It is not a payment that you just get for existing. It is going to be directly related to how well you perform during the event calls. The way this is going to be done is every event that's called, your system will be dispatched. There'll be a record of how much energy that you discharge from your system, or if you're a load modifying resource, how much load you reduce from your baseline usage. And that number is then going to be averaged over the course of the quarter or the year. And you're basically going to take that demand reduction, the average demand reduction, and multiply it by the total of these numbers. So I think I saw a question pop up about how are these numbers calculated or where do they come from? These come from what are called avoided cost benefits. And so I mentioned earlier, there is a large-scale docket going on to plan the bulk power grid. In that process, There's competitive solicitations for large solar systems, for large wind systems, for battery storage on the grid, for some limited amount of combustion turbines. Those each come at a cost, and the cost of those is what is going to be incurred if you had to build one of those large systems. So when we talk about avoided costs, what we're saying is by being able to reduce demand on the system during these peak times, you're getting the benefit of not having to build that next unit of utility scale generation. And so the cost of the generation here is reflective of a utility scale 4-hour battery. And the argument being, if we were able to put together a program that had 100 megawatts of a virtual power plant, then that's 100 megawatts fewer utility scale batteries that you would have to do instead. And so you can compensate customers at a percentage of that overall generation avoided cost value. Similarly, on the transmission side, by building these locally, you're able to avoid the need of some transmission. Then the transmission cost here are basically the cost of expanding the transmission system by a unit. And then finally, the distribution system are the benefits of avoiding the need to upgrade or expand distribution systems. So these could be, a new substation, larger wires on a feeder, so on and so forth. The one caveat on the distribution system, and this was a point of discussion in the case, is it's going to be limited to what are called congested feeders. And so the congested feeders are basically those that are going to experience a need for an upgrade within a relatively short time period. I think we landed on 5 years, where the system peak is between certain hours, basically where it aligns with the system peak. So the customers on that grid are using power at the same time as the system, and they will get an extra benefit by not only avoiding the generation and transmission costs, but also being able to delay or defer the distribution system cost upgrades. So not every system will qualify for the distribution benefit, but every system will qualify for the generation and transmission benefit. So on balance, at the end of the day, we calculated the avoided costs. We multiplied that by 90%. Basically saying 90% is going to go to the aggregate in the system, and the other 10% is going to remain as a benefit for the rate base as a whole. And then the net compensation that will be passed through to the aggregator is listed at the bottom there for a congested feeder. For someone who's not on a congested feeder, the maximum benefit for that customer would be in the $173 or so range. Now, again, an aggregator may differentiate which customers get which payments. That's going to be up to the aggregator and the customer. And the terms of that particular agreement. But these are at least the behind the scenes numbers that are calculated based on the reduction over the season of the resources. I think that's all the structural slides we have on that. Yeah, again, we've got some more stuff and some Q&A that I saw come, and I'll start typing in the chat on that. But going to go ahead and turn it over to Yara.
Thank you, Kevin, for all of that great information. We're going to pivot a little bit to talk about just PUC and utility regulation in general. As a reminder, my name is Yara Marin. I'm Deputy Program Director for the Interior West for Vote Solar. And Vote Solar is a national advocacy organization working to help transition the U.S. to a 100% clean energy future. Next slide, please. So what is the role of the Colorado PUC, or Public Utilities Commission? The PUC regulates electric, gas, and some transportation utilities. They decide how utilities can invest, what they can charge customers, and how quickly the state moves towards clean energy. Their decisions directly shape energy affordability, reliability, and the state's clean energy transition and direction. So the PUC is effectively the referee between monopoly utilities and the public interest. A lot of these decisions are also made through proceedings, right, in rate cases, dockets, and the commissioners matter, right? Sorry, next slide, actually. So the commissioners are appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate, and then served fixed terms. Their backgrounds, values, and priorities strongly influence a lot of the decisions that are made. Some emphasize utility profits, reliability, while others focus more on climate goals, equity, and consumer protections. And unlike legislators who pass broad laws, commissioners decide how these laws are implemented. And so the details that make or break affordability, access, emission outcomes. And so in Colorado, we have Chairman Eric Blank, who was appointed in 2020, Commissioner Tom Plant, who was appointed in 2023, and then Commissioner Megan Gilman, who was appointed in 2020. We also have the IOU, so the investor-owned utilities regulated by the PUC, which is Xcel Energy and Black Hill Energy. So Xcel Energy is the largest electric and gas utility in the state. It serves about 1.6 million electric customers and then about 1.5 million natural gas customers. And Black Hill Energy provides both electric and natural gas services as well, primarily in the southern part of the state, such as Pueblo and surrounding areas. And then the PUC also regulates some aspects of rural electric co-ops and municipalities like the Colorado Spring Utilities, but they are governed locally and not by the PUC. Next slide. So we're going to just talk a little bit about interveners, right? So interveners are often advocates from nonprofits, other government organizations that are granted permissions to have legal standing in some of these proceedings. And so the PUC allows interveners so that there is a diverse set of interests that are represented for regulators to consider during some of these proceedings as they make decisions, opportunity to gather information and hear from expert witnesses. And so without interveners, the proceedings would mostly just reflect the perspective of utilities and regulators and PUC staff, and not necessarily that of folks with lived experiences, those on the grounds who are impacted by some of these decisions directly. And so just wanted to talk a little bit about what we're up against, right? And why it's so important to make sure that folks are engaged at the PUC, that folks call in, provide public comment, call in, right? And get engaged. And we know that the PUC it's not necessarily as open, right? It's quite intimidating. There's a lot of technical jargon, a lot of closed door processes that don't always encourage proper stakeholding and public input. We also know, right, that a lot of these monopolies and utilities show up with lawyers. They have money behind them. And a lot of the communities don't necessarily always have time or the background and expertise to necessarily engage in some of these proceedings. A lot of the decisions made at the PUC often prioritize least cost over greatest need or over what might benefit communities the most in the long run. And so I think a lot of these processes really make justice feel like a little bit of a side note instead of a starting point that is really inclusive of the communities. A few other community barriers to engagement are just lack of access to timely information. Like we mentioned, right, a lot of the jargon, it gets extremely technical, and unless you're really immersed in the space, right, you might not necessarily understand all of the acronyms. A lot of meetings are held during work hours or aren't always virtual, and so it makes it a little more difficult for folks to attend and share their lived experiences and their stories. There isn't always necessarily translation offered, which creates a little bit of that language barrier that we've seen as well. And PUCs don't always recognize lived experiences as valid expertise. And so there's definitely an opportunity to shift power here. We want to make sure that we are using folks' lived experiences and taking that into consideration when when we're providing public comments. We want to make sure that we're treating these community members as experts, right, in training, that we're really redefining what equity looks like, and that's something that we're engaging in, and that the utilities don't take the lead on. And then we really just want to make sure that we're reshaping how evidence and data is presented during storytelling and when we're trying to make our case at the PUC. So how can we engage? There are quite a few ways, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to engage specifically in this docket. But we want to make sure that folks know that you can visit the PUC's website. You can actually subscribe to receive emails, and then You can also visit both Solar United Neighbors website and Vote Solar's website and subscribe to newsletters where you could receive frequent emails around how to engage at the PUC, what opportunities there are to just uplift your priorities and make sure that you all get a say in dockets like this that impact you directly. And so, yeah, I think this is the last slide, but what do we need to engage, right? And I think we just need to make sure we're always advocating for clear explanations of rules, timelines, making sure that we continue to attend these webinars and opportunities to share with your neighbors and friends. We want to, make sure that testimony include lived experiences and racial justice, that media strategies expose injustice and center community storytelling. And the priorities of folks who are at the front lines and the impacts of these decisions, and really ensuring that a lot of the public comment goes beyond what we're supporting to really talking about what these communities need and how they benefit from these decisions, the impact from these decisions, and also what they need to make sure that they are a part of this clean energy transition.
I can take back over here. Thank you, Yara and Kevin and Shannon and everybody who has joined today. I hope you all gained a lot from this. We definitely have some time to go through the questions and answers here in a second. There's a large truck passing outside my window, so I apologize if it gets noisy here in a second. But I'm actually going to go on mute. Give me just a second. I'm so sorry. Crash day at my apartment complex. So the truck is right outside our window, and it was about to get pretty miserable if I didn't close the window. So thank you for bearing with me for a second there. But yeah, there are definitely a few ways that you can immediately engage in this proceeding. We definitely need to elevate all of our voices, like Yara was just sharing, in order for the PUC to really understand how this is going to impact our communities. And really shaping how beneficial programs like this can be. There is a public comment hearing that's going to be virtual. I believe it's next Tuesday on August 26th. If that's something that you're interested in attending, definitely feel free to register with the PUC directly and also reach out to us. If you've registered for this webinar, which since you're here, I'm assuming you have, you'll be getting a follow-up email that has a recording, a way to take action via submitting a written comment, and then also a little one-pager that explains sort of how to go about sharing your story whenever you're submitting a public comment, and give some examples of what strong comments look like versus maybe comments that need a little bit of work, a little bit of tweaking. So all that will be provided to you to really set you up in a place where you feel comfortable and confident sharing your story in comments. If you need a little bit extra support, or if you really want to do it, but you don't have experience and would like to learn how, feel free to reach out to Sun, Vote Solar, really anybody here, and we can have a conversation about ways to do that and ways to engage. For everybody here, something that's really easy to do is submit a written comment using the web page that we have up here. You're able to click that. It's one of the, sort of the form emails. If you're like me, you like to read through those before you hit send. So feel free to give it a look and tweak things, add some of your own story to it, and send it into the PUC, just so we can make sure that as many voices as we can generate are heard on this issue. And then finally, make sure that you're sharing this with other folks. We love whenever the information that we're providing travels word of mouth and gets to your friends and family. So definitely feel free to use this webinar, other things that Sun and the organizations here put together, to share with folks that are in your life and could be impacted by these decisions. Thank you all again for being here. I am going to start going through some of the questions that we got in the Q&A box that have been marked for a live answer. And we'll pass those off to some of the co-presenters here. So first question that is on the list is acknowledging that there are many utilities and groups that have VPP programs, wanting to hear a little bit about how this is different. I do want to name one thing before I pass this over to an answer. I saw a theme in some questions. Solar United Neighbors, we're proposing a policy solution. We are not presenting ourselves as the aggregators or program administrators, the folks that are going to be sort of running this. So I just wanted to name that before we got into this, because I saw that as a theme that was popping up in some of the questions. So to this first question, I imagine Shannon, Kevin, you all would, either one of you would be good to hop in on that.
Yeah, I'll take a quick stab. I mean, I think we landed in a spot that has a very similar program design to some of the more established ones. Probably the most well-known one is the Connected Solutions program in the Northeast, which I believe has been around for maybe 2018 or 2019. And a lot of our advocacy has been using that program design, a pay-for-performance structure. You measure over the course of a season, and then you multiply that average by an avoided cost benefit while splitting some of the benefits with the rate base as a whole. Third-party aggregators is another part of the model that we support, and making sure that the incumbent utility is not leveraging too much market power, particularly when the compensation to the end customer is not specified, as it is here in Colorado. The compensation numbers that we talked about are to the aggregator, who will then divide out that benefit between themselves and the end user. So, it definitely mirrors a lot of what other places are doing, but those have been successful programs. So I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel where it's not necessary.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. Next question here from Lauren. Could people wanting to contribute to the VPP make a small investment in storage for this purpose specifically? And then related to that, and the same question is, do solar gardens usually have storage?
Yeah, so I would always advise folks that, the distributed power plant or the virtual power plant program is going to be kind of adding value to your storage system, but it's not necessarily like the main reason you should get storage as a homeowner. So really, you have to kind of think through your home use. Obviously, affordability is an issue. How much energy you use, just kind of generally kind of your home situation. And then the idea again is that this program will add additional value to your battery system. But your battery system is there, again, we're talking about 80 events a year. So, the rest of the year, your battery is there for you. So you want to make sure that you're going to get the value that you would want out of that battery system. But we do hope, this program with the compensation structure that hopefully will get approved by the commission will provide some additional value to home storage and provide, an incentive structure that would allow you to maximize a storage resource, if that makes sense.
Yeah, in terms of the community solar, I don't think in Colorado that too many of the community solar systems have storage, and that sort of is a function of the program design, because the payments are compensated on generation. I know there was conversation of that in the last DACA where they addressed that particular program, and I know in other states, Illinois in particular, there was discussion, and they're looking to stand up a community solar plus storage program specifically to capture the same types of benefits that we're talking about here. The ability to shift that generation from the middle of the afternoon, where it may not be as valuable to the grid, and push it back into the early evening to better align with the peak demand and those early evening hours. So states are beginning to move in the direction of looking to solar plus storage on front of the meter, community solar or distribution connected systems. The distributed generation that I mentioned earlier, I believe that specifically contemplates storage, solar and storage on the distribution system. So they are looking to sort of start that program out, focused on the ability to shift that generation.
Yeah, and we know a lot of our municipal partners are particularly excited about community solar being and storage being a resource for the Excel program. And there was a commitment within the settlement to make sure that there's a pathway for community solar and virtual net metering systems to be a part of the program into the long term. But the initial part of the program will be stood up just with residential storage.
Thank you, Shannon. Kevin, next question also from Lauren. Can VPPs help during power outages?
They can help the individual person. So during I mean, and that's the benefit that Shannon was just alluding to, for the customer to have that reliability benefit for their own house. Depending on how you wire up the system, the solar plus storage system on an individual building can power the loads on that system. When there is a distribution system outage, standalone solar systems are generally required to go offline. So they are not allowed to be connected to the grid while the distribution system is down, so that you don't put power onto a line that the utility thinks is not energized. That's a danger to the linemen who are working there. So in the event of a widespread power outage, I would not expect a VPP type program to try to kind of jumpstart the grid or provide any loads outside of the individual houses that may be wired for that, where the system is at. Now there's other things like a microgrid, which some of you may heard of, which is a different type of aggregation of resources and loads that can function independently from the bulk power grid, and could be able to sort of serve the houses or the businesses that are on a microgrid. But those are not that common. They tend to be in like campus settings, so colleges or industrial campuses may have a microgrid. But for the most part, no, I would not expect the VPPs to be doing anything to serve load when the broader distribution system is not connected and working.
Yeah, and that's why it's particularly important that we advocated for that ability for homeowners to retain 100% of their battery capacity if we expect an event, a weather event that could potentially cause the grid to go out. So, I'm in Wyoming, just next door to Colorado, and we have the same kind of storm situation you all do in April and October. You get a heavy snow. Those power lines go down. So, thinking of events like that, you would still have 100% of your battery available if the grid does go down, and then you have that for personal resilience needs. So that's sort of how it works with both the personal kind of resilience and the grid as a whole. Tanner, I'm seeing a lot of questions about aggregators. People have questions about aggregators. I'm wondering if Kevin kind of maybe could take this. There's a bucket of things about, consumer protection concerns and compensation trickling down to homeowners, how it all works with kind of aggregators, registration, who participates, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would say, some of the big names that you have heard, some of the national companies like Tesla and Sunrun and probably GoodLeap. Those are the type of companies who I would imagine are going to sign up as aggregators. They have a relationship with customers who have installed their own products. They already have the apps in place and the connectivity in place that I mentioned. And so, for an existing customer who has a Tesla system, I could see them getting reach out from Tesla and saying, "Hey, this new program's here. Do you want to participate? Here's our terms. Here's how you would be compensated. Here's how it's going to work." And then signing up for that type of a program. There may also be independent third parties who decide to take a run at this, just like there are independent demand response providers that operate in other parts of the country, and they may just go out and try to solicit customers to participate in this without having that existing relationship. So there's no real strict definition of who can participate. There are some terms and conditions on making sure it's a sort of a financially viable entity, and having a screening and approval process to make sure that the aggregators are of sufficient size that they can actually pull off what they need to do, and be able to do the verification and measurement on the back end, and handle that process. But I would expect there to be, largely some of the names that you would recognize who already install solar and storage systems at homes and businesses.
Yeah, and a lot of these programs work so, your installer can be a part of these programs, particularly if you're a lessee of solar and storage resources. So the third-party ownership model is pretty prevalent within these systems. It could be also that your battery manufacturer becomes an aggregator in these programs. And so if you're, if you have an Enphase battery or again, a Tesla battery, it could be that that manufacturer becomes an aggregator and then you use kind of the battery app and you're able to participate as a homeowner through that battery manufacturer. At Sun, we really believe in having these programs open to as many companies as possible. We want to ensure customer choice and make sure that there's flexibility related to that for customers. But we also do want to make sure that there is consumer protection as well. And so we do believe in, some sort of registration and the ability for customers to, file complaints with the commission or other state agencies that might be helpful for them. And then I would just also highlight, of course, Sun has a national help desk that's always available to folks that have solar battery storage. Feel free to reach out to us directly if you have concerns or questions about your system and your compensation, your lease agreement, any of those pieces. We're here to help as well. We really want to make sure that customers have a good experience in these programs.
Yeah, and it just occurred to me, and I think the answers that I was typing in the chat were not going to everybody. They were going to just the hosts, which doesn't help you guys a lot. So I'm going to repaste those real quick. Sorry about that.
No worries. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, everyone should benefit from your brilliance. So make sure that happens.
I was having to figure out on my side too who I was actually sending chats to. So I haven't used Zoom in a long time. But thank you all for getting into those. I'm seeing a couple of other questions here, just sort of picking themes now that we're coming to time about rural electric co-ops and uni utilities. Just a quick note there, while this program that's currently being deliberated on at the PUC is specifically for Xcel as the investor-owned utility, these programs are not exclusive to investor-owned utilities, and they can certainly be set up across the state and across the country in all kinds of different utility districts. Like Shannon mentioned, places like Holy Cross Energy, which is a rural electric co-op that already has a similar program. And it's definitely something that as Solar United Neighbors, we're interested in finding ways to collaborate with rural electric co-ops across the state to stand up these programs. Couple other things here. I saw a few comments about public hearing and public comments. Like I mentioned, we'll get talking points and everything over to you all. Saw a comment from Mariah, I think, asking about outreach with registered neighborhood organizations. I can't find that comment now, but I hope I got that right. That is definitely something that as Solar United Neighbors, we're interested in supporting. I'm in Colorado. We have a Colorado team, and we are sort of frequently on the road, popping into different communities to talk about different programs and projects that are getting stood up. And we are more than happy to be a resource to you and your organization if you feel like it's a good fit. So feel free to reach out to our Colorado team or me directly, and we can talk about standing something up to support you and your organization and your community. Anything else in here?
Hey, Tanner. I don't know if it's answered in the chat yet, but a lot of folks asking about bidirectional EV charging. And if that's a thing.
Yeah, I put something in the chat, and again, sorry, I was typing these out to the wrong audience. So I would say the bidirectional charging is a very interesting potential resource. There still is some work to be done on the regulatory front to kind of define the rules on how those would participate. I don't think it's explicitly excluded from this program. So to the degree that bidirectional chargers become a wider spread thing, and the Colorado Commission sets up the rules and regulations on how they can interact with the grid, those could be future resources that are added in the out years. But I do remember a couple years ago when the transportation electrification programs and dockets were being argued in front of the commission. Xcel said, hey, we've got to treat every single one of these bidirectional chargers the same way we treat anything that's going to put power onto the grid. So they were actually talking about having an interconnection process and doing studies and all these things, much the same way they do for solar and battery systems right now. So And they said, by the way, we've got maybe 60,000 at the time solar systems, but we could be seeing hundreds of thousands of cars. So the scale of the integrating them into their system and developing these rules could actually be even larger than what solar and batteries are. At the moment, I don't think they've really defined what that is. So I believe that bidirectional charging is limited to serving loads on your property, but not exporting to the grid. If I'm wrong about that in Colorado, someone can correct me, but I think that's the state of play at the moment. I would expect that to change over the next several years as the cars and the capabilities become wider spread. And they could be a huge resource to participate in this.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah,
One
I
other
mean, just add, it's Sun, we're particularly excited about things like school buses and, community resources as well that can be plugged into these programs. So again, lots of opportunity. This program's just getting started and we're excited to see where it's going to go.
Thanks, y'all. One other question theme that I'm seeing, just to close us off, I'm going to put you all under pressure here. Seeing a lot of questions about like me as the storage owner, me as the homeowner, like what is the concrete benefit of this program to my situation? That's summarizing a bunch of different questions that I've seen pop up. But if you all could talk sort of in layman's terms, like how is this actually going to impact people's lived experiences?
The concrete benefit is you get a check that you would otherwise not have gotten. I mean, plain and simple. You're using your asset in a way that aligns with the needs of the system. There's benefits associated with that for you and the system as a whole. And this program recognizes that value and returns some of it to the individual.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, everybody, we are at the hour. I can never remember if we're at the top of the hour or the bottom of the hour. So I'm just going to say we're at the hour. Thank you all for coming out. Really appreciate you being here. Feel free to connect with us anytime and be on the lookout for a follow-up email. Thanks, everybody, and have a good one. Bye.